Well, good afternoon. I'm talking to a colorful empty screen, but I know that more to the point, we're talking to a group of folks who have taken time out of their very busy afternoons. It's afternoon wherever you are, I suspect, to join us for this webinar on legal design. And we're very, very delighted to have you here. Don't draw the lesson from the fact that I had the most words in my bio for the list to believe that I'm the most important participant. I'm the least important participant. I'm your moderator, Dan Rodriguez, and I have the good pleasure and fortune to chair the council for the ABA Center for Innovation, and I have a bunch of other day jobs that I won't bore you with. But I will give an infomercial, a short one, for the ABA Center for Innovation, particularly for those of you who haven't had the pleasure to learn about what we're up to. We are a startup, I guess, if I could say, in the biz. We're a relatively new center established by the ABA a couple years ago as an outgrowth of the great work from the Commission on the Future of Legal Services. And the ABA Center for Innovation was established by the ABA, by the poobahs at the ABA, to be a catalyst for innovation, to promote the great work that's being done in the ABA and outside the ABA in the profession of law and variety of organizations in the business sector and the technology sector in order to promote innovation in the provision of legal services. We are obviously, and we'll hear more about that this afternoon, squarely concerned with the access to justice crisis and doing our good work as those of us who are involved in the work of the center, on the council and elsewhere, in promoting and facilitating and catalyzing innovation wherever it's found, also producing materials, information, apps, and work to really help along this process. This is the second webinar in what we know will be a series of interesting conversations. I just want to mention that we have a webinar that is recorded and up on our network that we recorded a few months back. A very interesting conversation between my colleague, Dean Andy Perlman of Suffolk Law School, and Judge Scott Schlegel, a district judge in Jefferson Parish in Louisiana, who is working on a very interesting smart supervision program in the 24th District to reduce recidivism. So I urge you to take a look at that webinar, and also to be on our mailing list for future webinars. But without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome two friends of mine and friends of the center and great assets to the work that we're doing on the center, Margaret Hagan and David Colarusso. Margaret Hagan is the director of the Legal Design Lab and is a lecturer at the School of Design, the so-called D School. She was a fellow at the D School from 2013 to 14, where she led a program for legal tech and design, experimenting in how design can make legal services more usable, useful, and engaging. Teaches at Stanford a series of project-based classes with interdisciplinary student groups tackling legal challenges through user-focused research and design of new legal products and services. She also leads workshops to train legal professionals in the design process to produce client-focused innovation. Margaret graduated from Stanford Law School in June 2013, and she holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago, a master's degree from Central European University in Budapest. And just to show you, you need 4, not 3 degrees, PhD from Queen's University, Belfast, in international politics. David Colarusso, who obviously has a big fan who keeps trying to call him on the telephone, and old technology, as it were. David is the director of Suffolk University Law School's Legal Innovation and Technology Lab. An attorney and educator by training, worked as a public defender, data scientist, software engineer, and high school physics teacher. He's the author of a programming language for lawyers, Q&A Markup, an award-winning legal hacker, an ABA legal rebel, and Fast Case 50 honoree. Colarusso attained his JD from Boston University's Law School and received his BA from Cornell and his MED from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He began his legal practice as a staff attorney for the Massachusetts Public Defender Agency. I could go on, but won't, because I want us to hear from these two great visionaries and innovators. They are going to talk about some wonderful projects they're involved in, but I am going to waylay them before they get into that, to ask a big picture question, given the extraordinarily important and impactful positions they both have at their respective institutions, and to talk a little bit about how their respective programs work on access to justice issues, just to frame and shape a little bit more about what they're up to. So let me start with you, Margaret.
Sure. So we've had a 5-year engagement now with the Judicial Council of California, where we've run a series of almost 10 classes with different units inside the Judicial Council. This morning, I was doing the latest one, which is around language access technology and language access services. Most often we partner with the self-help centers directly in the county courts or at the administrative statewide level. And we do a lot of on-the-ground work in the courts. So a lot of qualitative work, talking to people about needs unfilled, technology possibilities, whether they would be welcome or not, and other types of new designs, interventions, changes to space, changes to process, changes to professional rules that both court staff and especially litigants in the court would improve their experience and would improve their justice outcomes. And then from all that on-the-ground work, we in the classes and then in our ongoing projects, we develop working prototypes of these new technologies or new designs. For the most promising ones, we actually run pilots and do proper, rigorous studies about whether they improve people's ability to navigate process, show up at court, get to good outcomes. So some of the projects that have come out of all those classes and exploratory work are text message reminders to guide you through the divorce process in Orange County, or visual explainers for traffic court in Alameda County and San Francisco County, and then lots of digital guides to walk people through step by step. So we try to almost be a sandbox where court officials and self-help center leaders can try out new ideas, and we can also be playing a more provocative role to help them really think in a more challenging way about what innovation might look like in their courts.
So we're going to talk about substance, but I'm dying to ask you a question about process. And I'm going to bungle this metaphor, but if it's a sandbox, the creator of that sandbox in the first instance are the courts themselves, right? You don't work for the courts in any formal sense. So what's been the receptiveness? Take us through how they came to you, as it were, and your group to help facilitate this.
Well, I think before this, so our group started running design workshops where literally, we had a few bottles of wine and some hors d'oeuvres and said, hey, court leaders of the Bay Area, which of you either at local county roles as judges, as self-help center directors, as court investigators, or in the more administrative offices in the Judicial Council, who is interested in new types of solutions and also in hearing more from communities about what the new direction should be. So we kind of had these open door events starting in around 2013 and 14 when I was running my D-School fellowship here. And from those open door events, we found the judges and especially the people in Judicial Council who had been thinking around what innovation could look like, but didn't necessarily have a methodology or the human capacity to form teams and actually go out into the field and do a lot of this testing and information gathering. So we were able to find enough leaders, especially in the self-help center world. I think they're hugely interested in innovation, but just don't have the capacity to take time off from day-to-day work. And from chief information officers, who I think are really forward-thinking here in California about all the data that their groups are sitting on and how it could possibly be used to change policies, to change services.
So I take it you'd agree that a lot of the folks you mentioned, and you use the term leaders, are really the unsung heroes in all of this, the folks that understand. Yes. There's room for innovation, there's a need for innovation, know where to look for it, are willing to show up to these folks, not just because of the wine and cheese, but because of the ideas and the opportunities to really partner. That's terrific.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pent-up ideas.
You had the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab, the so-called LIT Lab. Also, I take it not a reference to wine.
Well, we do play upon the vernacular usage as well. We definitely got to have fun with our logo there.
There you go. It's always about
the flame of knowledge, right?
Okay.
But yeah, at the LIT Lab, what we basically operate as, so we're interesting. So in addressing your original question about access to justice, we're unique in that we're actually part of our clinical program. So we're a partnership between our clinical program and our Legal Innovation and Technology Institute. And we serve basically as a consultancy inside the law school, staffed by myself and students, providing data science and legal tech solutions and consulting to both clients external and internal. So obviously some of our internal clients are our clinics themselves, but then we also partner with courts, occasionally small firms, and other entities to help provide them with projects. And we've only been around not quite for a year now. So our portfolio is not quite as broad, as large as Margaret's, but we have worked on.
How do you advertise your work? How do you project yourself out in the community and say we're basically open for business?
Webinars like these. Also,
okay.
we try to have a presence on social media, and right now we're working on working with existing partners that we have through the university and through our networks to find people that are interested in doing interesting things. And actually, we haven't had a want for people who are interested in working on stuff. So you say, oh, you want to help build a machine learning algorithm that codifies some of your daily processes to help predict whether or not a case is going to be a good match for you. Everyone says, okay, yeah, sure. So if you want to do that, please talk to us more. But yeah.
So I may be more interested in the answer to this question than most of our guests on this webinar. So we need not spend a lot of time on it. But as a professional legal educator, I'm dying to ask how do you involve students in this? How do you engage law students and also students from, as I know is the case in Margaret's lab, from elsewhere in the university to get engaged, and how are students utilized in this space in your particular labs?
Yeah, so in my lab, the thing that's really nice is being part of the clinical program. Experiential education is the name of the game already. So what we're basically is taking is that experiential education experience, normally of working with a client and helping them with legal matters, changing that to working with a client on these legal tech matters. So it's the same model of learn through doing and helping elicit that ability for our students to be able to learn how to adapt to all the things that might be thrown at them. So it's really by taking that model of experiential education and saying, here's a client, they have real needs. This is something that we're going to be there to help support you and figure it out, but you have to help them get what they want and what they need, and helping our students build the skills they need to be able to deliver those solutions to their clients. And so,
and your students, before we turn to Margaret, your students are law students, right?
Yeah, these are all law students. So one of the things that's maybe interesting about our program, but not so interesting, but sometimes I think confusing to people, is we're not trying to produce a bunch of attorneys who are going to go out and create technology solutions and technology startups by being their own programmers. We're not trying to turn any of our students into production coders. What we're trying to do is give them the skills they need to be able to recognize things out in the world, understand the realm of the possible, know if something's out there, can their BS detector know whether or not that's really real? Can they work with technologists to build solutions that are meaningful? Can they bring an attorney's eye to something and recognize the bias and the problems that might come with a technological solution? Can they understand the technological issues facing their clients in a way that's going to allow them to serve their clients? Because we all operate in a world now where a lot of stuff is happening in this virtual space. If you don't understand how that works, it's hard for you to advocate for your client effectively. So we're really about building people who are able to be part of interdisciplinary teams and be able to sort of serve as a translator with a foot in both worlds of sort of law and tech, and be able to facilitate those projects that only really happen when you get that cross-pollination.
If I could add a third world, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but also business as a world, right? So it's law, tech, and also business, and the business I'll go into. Yeah,
I mean, this is where my background is showing. I come from a public defender. I've been a civil servant most of my time. I did have a small business at one point. But yeah, and with the clinics, our focus is very often government and nonprofit. But we did have a very interesting project with a small personal injury firm where they wanted to take their calls data and figure out what was it about a call that made it worthy for them to take that person on as a client, so they could give that client benefit and also benefit from it as an office. So yeah, business as well. We'll take it.
Great. Margaret, how about how do you involve students in your design lab?
So sure, I think over the years we've refined kind of more of a funnel approach where we have a big tent for all of our classes. So we advertise all of our classes through as much cross-listing. And the wonderful thing about the design school here at Stanford is if you get your class listed through here, you can get a very wide mix of grad students and undergrads. So most of our classes, like our language access class this quarter, we have about 15 students. Only 5 of those are law students. 10 are coming from other fields, especially education, sociology and public policy, and really engineering. So they're usually people who are interested in making government services better, civic technology, or kind of more holistic, like poverty-related work. So we find some of those great crossovers, lots of expertise from around campus coming together. So at those classes, the students get to go on the ground. They start to develop some leadership skills and bringing stakeholders together and how to harness technology, how to scope out projects. And if they really love that work, and especially if they have projects that have tested well in class, then they can graduate up to being RAs or project fellows, where they take on even more leadership roles in going out and taking a project or a class project level, which is still pretty raw, and then getting it ready for a pilot run, building more partnerships, securing funding, getting engineering development done. And then we have some like wonderful students who then kind of own their whole 3L year is spent on taking a project fully out to be piloted, tested, and possibly scaled. And sometimes they even teach classes and build their own student teams. That's kind of our shining examples of students really taking off.
What's it like about bringing these different populations together, these learning the strange folk ways of engineers working with lawyers, future lawyers? I mean, we think so much in the law school environment about training our students in this specialized language, thinking like a lawyer, that your sort of out of the box method tests or interrogates that assumption that you can't bring these multidisciplinary folks together, but obviously you can.
Yeah, I think it definitely, as a teacher, you need to play a facilitator to enforce that people don't get bucketed, where it's like the lawyer in the team or the law student in the team is only given room to answer questions on policy and law. And then the engineer on the team is supposed to have all the magic answers about what the perfect solution is going to be. So the goal there is to help them, get more realistic, that engineers should not be making huge assumptions about how easy it is to change the law or to change regulations. And the lawyers should not be making huge misconceptions about what machine learning could actually do, like to get out of magical thinking. So we try to keep the teams really small so that they can't segregate out and that they have to almost teach each other their own problem-solving techniques that they've been trained in their separate schools with.
Great. So I want to ask you, both of you are proselytizers, if I could say that, for the idea that legal tech design is human-centered design, or human-centered design is at the heart and soul of that, as I understand it. Could you say a bit, both of you, about what you mean by human-centered design in this particular context? Margaret, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll take a stab. So a little bit of it is making sure that I think there's a lot of techno-optimism out there. Maybe it's tempered a little bit with everything going on with elections and misinformation, but generally I think, especially in law, we're really excited.
No collusion.
Okay, we're in a deep fake situation. No, I think, there's so much energy over the past decade, especially around how government and civic and legal worlds will get so much better, will be more efficient and more usable. But that can lead to rushing into technology projects without making sure that the money is spent well, that the technology is appropriate and ethical, and also that it will actually be used. So that's where we see a lot of value in taking a human-centered approach, along with a strong focus on technology's promise, that we're talking to people on the ground, we're having them lay out what values and ethical kind of guidelines, and where the priorities should be, honestly. Because I think we can see that it's really easy in a hackathon moment to get excited about a project or an idea, hope that it will work, and then start to invest resources in. But we hope to kind of ground that back into the community's needs and priorities.
Yeah, I think
so David, before you jump in, I'm going to ask you a harder question, which is I want to riff on that for a moment and ask you, is there a conflict between this focus on human-centered design when much of the legal tech work and the movement it's going is developing toward chatbots and not human devices, and not necessarily lawyers replaced by robots, but we're moving toward technology technology solutions and app
So
solutions. How do you square that with the
yeah, so I think that's a false dichotomy, because the human that's at the center of the design is the person who's getting the service. So really, we're talking about our clients. So it's not dehumanizing to offer a solution to someone that might be some type of technical solution. The human at the center is, what is this going to be beneficial to the end user? That end user might be a professional using a tool to help them assist clients, or it might be something like you were talking about, something like a pro se tool that helps someone without an attorney present. But in either of those cases, the human is the person who you're serving. And so all you're doing with human-centered design is asking, is this solution actually serving that person? And the best way to do that is to talk to that person. And I think that's really the key thing about the design approach, is that this is a scientific method. You have a hypothesis about what's going to solve a certain problem for someone. And then you test that by actually getting something in front of them and saying, does this actually solve it? And I think the reason why Margaret and I are so attached to this idea of human-centered designers, design thinking in general, is that it's this iterative process of actually making sure the thing you think is helping. So it's really building in a success metric and a measure to see, is this actually working, as opposed to just, we're making something cool.
So let me press on that. How do you do your assessments? How do you, in your labs and out of your labs, do your assessments to really check in on how effective they are and how truly client responsive these devices are?
So it's different for every client, right? So if you have a client who they're trying to, like the example I used before, create an algorithm to figure out if we're matching well with clients. So who to take on calls. Well, so why do they want that? So one of the reasons you might want that, there are a couple of reasons. You might want to codify your existing experience so that you can interrogate it, right? What are that gut feeling that we have that says we take this client over that client? What really is driving that? So by codifying that, you can interrogate that and say, are these things really, are we maybe making biased decisions? Are we always taking people who do X over Y, and is that reasonable? You can also use it to scale, right? Because maybe you have turnover in that position and you want people to be able to help make that decision consistently across different users, or you just want to scale to have more people use it. So it's really what their needs are. So you have to ask the client, why do you want this? And you don't you don't start with the solution, you start with the problem. So if they say, well, my problem is we want to scale this, then that's one set of measures. If it's, we're worried about how we don't actually understand why we make these decisions, that's another set of measures. And then if we're talking about sort of the chatbot example that you're talking about, well, then, you go to your very traditional sort of design processes of sitting down with clients and talking to them. And that might be either in the development process, well, it's definitely in the development process, but then longitudinally checking in with users and saying, were you able to find what you were looking for? Did this meet your needs in X, Y, and Z manners? So the way you do it, I guess, is you establish what is the problem you're trying to solve. And then you figure out if you've really solved that by having the person with the problem answer that question. I don't know if that was.
No, it's very much. Please, Margaret.
I would just, that in my lab, again, this is another thing we've refined over the years to kind of make different methods work for the specifics of especially self-help and access to justice. So usually, like what we're going to do at court next week is the students are going to go with their top 10 ideas of how language access could be improved through technology. And they're going to show very high-level versions of their top 10 ideas to court staff and to people waiting in line and in the self-help center. We'll pay them little bits of money and they'll rank the ideas against each other. So even before we decide where to spend our money, we do these kind of focus groups and quick rankings using something called the Delphi method. So we get like a community ranking of where should we spend our money, like participatory budgeting. And then from there, we do a lot of what David is saying. So we do a lot of focus groups, walk-alongs and ride-alongs. I would encourage any lawyer to do these kind of things, even if you don't have technology-based solutions. But basically, you invite your client or your target user in and have them try to use your work product, whether it's an application or a memo you've written or a presentation. You just kind of watch them and then ask them, like, how would you rank this? What do you think? We use technical rankings for our tech products, like usability scales and procedural justice scales, like 10-question surveys. And then after that, then we graduate to more official, like observational trials and randomized control trials to see how do people really behave with it in the field. And those are kind of more academically rigorous evaluations.
This may be...
I was just going to say also in the work, so we also do data science work as opposed to just technological solution work. And there you're establishing success metrics that you're then measuring in sort of your very sort of standard sort of statistical sense of that you're looking for things, like false positives, false negatives. Accuracy is not the thing that you're usually looking for, right? The example I always give is, if you're trying to predict whether or not school will be canceled because of a snow day, if you have a model that says no, you're going to be accurate 98% of the time because most days are not snow days. So really sort of digging in and sort of figuring out what are the things that you're worried about. Are you worried about false positives? Are they really costly? Or are false negatives really costly? So it's sort of that screening versus diagnostic test that you see in the medical community. So it really is getting to know your client and what their needs are, and then helping refine a success metric with them.
As I listen to this, maybe this is a naive point, but as I listen to this as shall we say, the older person in this chat room we're in, is that what you're describing in terms of the metrics and the client-centered focus and some of these assessment tools can be broadened well beyond technology-based solutions, right? You mentioned, David, with the clinic before. It seems those are involved in clinical education and live client clinics, whatever they're serving and however they're serving clients, would learn much from how you all are doing assessment of success and measures of success in the context of your more tech-oriented programs.
Yeah. The key thing is that the really important thing to underline is, in whatever context you're doing this, those measures of success that you choose are going to drive whatever it is you're doing. And so you have to be really thoughtful about those. So, if you get into some questions about, sort of like algorithmic fairness, right? So if you're building an algorithm to make some decision or help make some decision, if your success metric doesn't take into account fairness, however you want to account for that, then you're not going to optimize for fairness. So, that gets a couple sentences there is sort of a glib sort of thing that we could talk for hours about. But the point is, you have to think carefully about what it is you want to care about. And if you want to care about fairness, you have to have a way to codify that and to look at it. And because if you're not, then you're not taking it seriously.
Interesting. So, it's an observation and then a question. What has kept tech-based solutions or the use of technology in the space of access to justice, as I read the literature, is not simply the lack of availability of technology, although of course that's a key part of it, but for years and years and years, the lack of available data, and big data in particular, that of course is now available to an extraordinary degree and exponentially growing in all sorts of ways. And I know both of in your work and all, you've worked in that area. Here we go. I'm gonna shut up now.
Well, I just thought you said big data.
This wasn't planned.
I just had to share this.
What do you think of that? Yeah.
Go for it, David.
So yeah. Well, so this is actually probably the reason why Margaret are together on this this webinar. So we were at the LSC conference last year, and
this year.
I don't have to show the big data bit, but we were on the
I was digging on that Star Wars, or the Star Trek.
Star Trek.
Okay, sorry. All right. All right. It's like cut.
But yeah, so we were having a conversation. Margaret's lab has been working on a taxonomy of legal issues, and we were having a conversation about sort of where she could use those to help legal service centers and the like get people to the services they need. And someone from Microsoft came by, and there was discussion about how hard it is for natural language processing to be able to match people up with things. And I'm like, yeah, well, the main thing is from a machine learning standpoint, what you need data to train things. And there had just been a talk by some guy who was a moderator on Our Legal Advice, which is a forum on the internet, part of a website called Reddit, if you know it. Actually, people read Our Legal Advice for fun, which is something that Margaret and I are both hoping will help us out with our next project. And I've said, well, we just need data. Why don't we ask them if we can use theirs? And we'll have someone come in and label it. And so what their data is a bunch of lay legal questions. Basically, someone goes online, they go to the forum, they say, I'm having a problem with my landlord. They said X, Y, and Z, what should I do?
On Reddit. They do this on Reddit. Yeah.
Yes, on Reddit. And we can have another discussion about, the answers they get and all that sort of stuff. What we were interested in is in the questions, because these are real people with real problems asking questions the way they ask questions without all the legalese. And so what we've done is we have a project we're really excited about, and we're going to tell you all to follow us on Twitter, because next week there's going to be a big announcement.
We're ready. We're ready to hear about it.
But we set together a project where we're crowdsourcing the labeling of this Reddit data and other data so that we can use it to create really high quality labeled data in regards to people's legal questions, mapped to the taxonomy out of the legal design lab, so that we can then train machine learning classifiers on it to actually match people up with their needs using, AI, which is, we're just talking about machine learning, which, it's not a robot lawyer. Let me just be very clear, not a robot lawyer, but getting people closer to where they need, removing some of that burden is really what we're doing. So I'll let maybe Margaret talk more about.
Well, I want to hear Margaret describe it. Before I do that, I'm still trying to get over the as someone who studied law in the grand method and read all these wonderful opinions by the great jurists. Probably no greater jurist than the great learned hand. Perhaps he's spinning in his grave into this program.
Well, here
I'll
set Margaret. I'll set Margaret up for it, right? So how are we going to label all these questions, right? Oh, it's so difficult. If only someone could label all these questions, there was someone with the energy to do that. Oh, you know what? Many hands make light work. If only.
Many hands do make light work. So yeah, we had this vision that we could make it actually fun to read all of these legal advice or legal help posts and then categorize them. So that's been one of the big projects David and I have worked on over the summer, which we're ready to debut next week, which is a game online called Learned Hands, in which we present to lawyers and law students these posts from Reddit where people talk for 1 paragraph or 3 paragraphs or sometimes even 10 or 20 paragraphs about the situation they're in. And it's equivalent to somebody walking into a court or a legal aid clinic and saying, here's my problem. What should I be doing about this? I think it might be legal. I don't know. So what the law student or the lawyer player of the game, player of Learned Hands, does is just answers questions about whether they think a certain legal issue is present. And right now we're asking really high level questions. So do you think a family law issue is present in this long post about someone and their mom and their estate plan and all the complications with their will? Or do you think a housing law issue is present? Or do you think a money debt consumer issue is present? And with each of those yes or no answers that our players give to the questions, that labels our data sets, and that goes into our the building of this machine learning model. So basically, as we get all of these labels from different players, those are like votes. And then we have a consensus algorithm that David has deployed to make sure that if there's a consensus, if all 5 or 10 people who see a question all agree that this is likely to have a family law issue present, then that is then hard labeled into our data set as likely having a family law issue. If there's more disputes, then we have more people look at it.
Will you categorize from all the folks playing the game what their backgrounds are, so you'll be able to tell whether lawyers who are evaluating these folks or technologists or students, law students or others are broken down by cohort?
David, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so we intend to ask some questions about, so here's a wonderful Venn diagram Margaret made a while back about our project. But we do intend to ask people if they have a background, but we're actually trying to implement a solution that doesn't require people to have a background. So the idea behind this sort of wisdom of the crowds is that if there's enough, as long as people are wrong in different ways, then we're good to go. And we're also not set in stone in our sort of consensus algorithm. So we'll be collecting data, and if we find that there's a problem with people trying to game the system or something, we don't have to throw out our old data. We can recalculate how we do things. And it's not like a process where we have to know by 3 o'clock this afternoon, is there a issue of this type in this text? Our sort of fault tolerance is high because we can go back and unwind things. So our hope, our hypothesis is that a diverse group of people will be able to do the labeling pretty well. That being said, we're focusing the game at attorneys, law students, people who have an interest in the law, but we're not precluding anyone's participation. So I'm not sure if I actually answered your question.
No, that's great. Without nerding out too much on this, could you tell us a little bit about the machine learning part of this? What technology exists at the level of machine learning to help this game run?
Yeah, so the game itself is not really using, so we've got this algorithm in the background to help figure out whether or not something should be classified, and we use that to help tee up the next question so that the question someone's getting is always the one that's going to give us the most information, right? So the idea being if a question comes in and everyone says it's a family law, we can say, oh, that's family law, and we don't have to bug other people to vote on it. But if there's some disagreement, then we bug more people about it. So there's sort of that algorithmic setup in the game, but it doesn't have the things that people usually think about as machine learning going on. Machine learning comes from the output of the game, which is this labeled set of text, which is basically going to be a text, and it'll say, this item from the taxonomy people found to be present or didn't find to be present. And there we're using very common natural language processing methods. So, and there's sort of an empirical question of what's going to work best with this particular set of data. We've done some preliminary testing on some private data sets that we had that were already labeled. And very simple sort of, again, not to get sort of too much in the weeds. So just a very simple sort of bag of words interpretation. That's sort of like a natural language processing term of art, where basically you can sort of think about, it's almost like a
word cloud?
Yeah, it's like a word cloud kind of, is this words there more frequently than others? You might notice that family law matters, they have a lot of names of relationships, like brother, sister, mother, father. And so you can actually count those instances of individual words and then, multiple collections of words. So, reasonable doubt, or, whatever terms of art might come in sort of multiple n-grams. So that's sort of like one very simple thing. And we're just doing text classification. So we say, basically, can we find that out? To sort of really sort of draw back, because all of that probably means nothing to anyone. What we do is we take the text, we turn it into numbers somehow. So that numbers might be counting up how many times someone uses this word or that word. Or it might be using a more sophisticated method like something called word2vec, which people can Google, and it's like magic. Anyhow, the point is we turn the text into numbers, and then what we do is we basically then plot those numbers in some space. You can sort of think about it like some multi-dimensional space, like much more than 3 dimensions. And then we draw some surface.
Hey, I saw the Matrix. I know.
So if you think about it this way, like let's say you had just a two axes, right? And so this was how many times someone said landlord, and this was how many times someone said tenant, right? And so if someone says landlord and tenant a whole bunch of times, they're going to be up here. If they don't say it, they're going to be down here. And then what we do is we figure out what is that line or that curve, or in technically some space, some surface, that divides these type of questions from those. And then we say, if you're on this side of the line, we're going to call you family law. If you're on that side of the line, we're going to call you, whatever that collection is. And so really we're just taking text, turning it into numbers, finding surfaces between clumps of things. Those clumps of things, however, are the things that were already labeled, hopefully. And it relies upon things actually being clumped, right? So there's an empirical question here as to whether or not we'll actually be able to find all the issues. So for things like family law, we probably will be able to find them because people talk about them in the same way. But they're, consumer protection, it might be more difficult. In which case, what that means is you need more training data to better be able to figure out what the boundaries of that space are. And not to make it sound like it's all just, counting words, but that's a very simple way of doing it.
No, it's very helpful. To come back to something that Margaret said, and about folks finding their way to issues where they don't know they have legal problems and figuring out whether a problem is a legal problem or not a legal problem. And, I can't help but notice the connection to this path-breaking research that Professor Rebecca Sandifer, who's been involved in the Access to Justice movement, of course, and is part of the American Bar Foundation, and I should say a couple of weeks ago received an Arthur Genius Grant. Incredible for her work. But one of her key insights is the sheer number of individuals who have problems. They know they have problems. They don't know it's a legal problem. So before they even get to the question of access to a lawyer, there's the powerful threshold issue of whether the issue is or is not a legal problem. So this also, it seems to me, has some real insight and salience in connection with that research.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's a, yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I think the direction we're going in, which I don't want to presume will be happening in the next few months or even in the next year, we'll see how quickly we can build a strong model and classifier. But the whole driving thing is, we know that there are going to be more people talking about life problems on the internet or other digital spaces. So how can we start building this infrastructure and these classifiers that could live in search engines, on social media, on Reddit, on anywhere where people are kind of presenting, if we think of it in the health analogy, and that we could at least then spot and refer people and say, actually, it seems that you might have a justiciable event, a legal solution is waiting for you. So I think this is kind of an infrastructure project that David and I are doing now, and hopefully can spread out into a larger ecosystem of preventative outreach messaging to people to connect them to their legal rights and options.
Sure.
And Margaret's not playing up enough the work with the taxonomy, because that's really the key here. So the algorithms we build will be able to classify things into the taxonomy. Maybe other people will be able to build things based upon our labeled data, but it's all just in service of having a common language, a common set of standards that allow us to be able to match. If we can figure out what someone's issue is, then we can match them to the service they need. And so for that to happen, there has to be this sort of foundational work of identifying what the issues are. And so that's really like, I mean, we're building roads is what we're doing.
Well, it's and from a big picture perspective, it's part of the essential goal of technology-enabled design, right? Which is taking what is, after all, very complex phenomenon, big data, and the tools that can be complicated, but to get to reasonable solutions to make life easier rather than more difficult in that regard. I should also say, and both of you tell me whether I'm wrong, but this whole movement toward what's sometimes called gamification, which seems so incongruous, right, to lawyers from a different generation. Why are you teaching your students how to play games, right, in some way? But I take it this is an example of the gamification movement really giving us an important purchase and impact on the provision of legal services.
And I think I'm taking a lot of inspiration from these other citizen science projects that have come out of physics and cosmology and even the CAPTCHA movement, where other computer scientists and scientists have harnessed the crowd to really build good models, find important information, annotate a lot of data. So I think we in law can learn how to harness our wonderful community of lawyers and law students to do the same kind of citizenry work to make this infrastructure.
I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they're talking about how people have been trying to do the gamification thing for law for a long time. How do you know this is going to work? And of course, the answer is we don't. But they, pointing to other services where like, oh, we'll gamify, marking up cases. We'll gamify this. The one nice thing we've got going for us is the data set. So one of the things we didn't make clear about this data set, sort of assumed. So we have private data sets that we're classifying with secure numbers of people doing the labeling. The reason we can do this with the Reddit data is because Reddit bills itself as the front page of the internet. So people are making these posts public with the understanding that everyone in the world could see them. And then there are internal guidelines in that subreddit that actually specify that you remove your personal identifying information, and the moderators help to make that happen. And actually, we got our data set largely from actually a couple of the moderators at our legal advice. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. So I'm going to Chase Hurdle, who I should have started out at the very beginning to thank, and I'll thank him now, who's our able deputy director for the ABA Center for Innovation. He is also playing the role as impresario in terms of navigating questions that guests on the webinar have. So feel free to ask in connection with this wonderful project. Learned Hands, again, I'm going to have to get used to the title. So other activities and work in that space. And while we're stalling or waiting for some of those questions to come in, can you tell us a little bit about what's next? What's the next thing in terms of some of the collaborations within your groups or with other groups as well?
Because the big thing is that the game will do a hard launch next week. So if you want to get your hands on doing this, reading these things and labeling, watch Margaret and I online, and you'll see a link sometime early next week.
And can you send that? Well, I mean, I assume you'll broadcast that as widely as you can through your social network. But can we also maybe we'll talk offline about putting it on the center site so they can.
Yeah, and I think actually we talked with Chase. By the time this video goes out, we'll be launched, so it'll probably be included in the description of the video as well.
Interesting. So I have a couple questions coming in. So this one is on Learned Hands in particular. How do you get people to participate in this study? Are there any incentives?
Gunners.
So right now, yeah. So we gamified it, so it should be fun and rewarding in itself. Hopefully, I've played it so much. I have so many points. You have to come and try to beat me. I think I'm at 800,000 points on this platform. It's fun as a lawyer to have all these kind of on the ground stories and filter through them. So there is a fun element. We also, in our testing rounds, and to get large participation, we've been paying some research assistants who have been wonderful and been our test users of it. But our goal is that we can also possibly get pro bono credits. We're talking with some law firms about whether this might qualify as a pro bono activity, which we think strongly that it should, that it really goes to a public good, this infrastructure. But yeah, try it out and hopefully it'll be self-rewarding enough. Yeah,
and so to be clear, the gamification includes things like seeing how good you are compared to your peers, right?
Well, you've just humiliated us. We're not going to be able to beat Margaret Hagan.
You can beat me. Come and get me. I'm ready.
So here's an idea that just came over the transom. Maybe partnering with major bar prep groups, Barbary, Kaplan. There's thousands of law schools getting law students ready for the bar. Maybe a good way to train data at a high level, someone suggested.
Yeah. And I think we've talked with some legal aid groups about this too, as they're training community volunteers or other people who are going to be fielding all of these questions from the public. This is a great way to know if you're doing that triage right. Yeah.
Yep. Interesting. So we're still waiting for other questions. You've avoided a little bit, elided the question of what's next, because I know that it's probably top secret. If you told me, you'd have to kill me. But maybe I can ask it a little more opaque way, which is sort of what are some of the access to justice crisis points where you think, on your wish list, what are the moonshots, as it were, in this, in this area?
So I guess
go ahead,
David.
Yeah. So one of the things that's I can't officially talk about, but I'm really excited, is some partnerships.
Oh, it's a private. It's just
no one's watching.
Yeah. So some partnerships with some prominent search engine providers about really changing how search results are shown for anyone who has a query that indicates one of these access to justice. Like, I just got an eviction notice. What do I do? How do I get a restraining order? How do I get my FEMA benefits? So hopefully working at one of these key source points, which is people searching online or on social media, how we really change how information is served up to direct them to jurisdiction correct, public and actionable presentations